Amid a sudden burst of chaos, a policeman, driven by an uncontrollable impulse, struck Keanu Reeves with his baton, only to be overwhelmed seconds later by a profound wave of regret that unveiled the fragility of his own humanity, transforming that act into a pivotal moment that would forever change his life. The gun felt impossibly heavy in Eliza's hand as she pointed it at the man who'd stolen everything from her. Keanu Reeves stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the abandoned warehouse. Outside, rain pounded against the metal roof, creating a thunderous backdrop to the moment she'd imagined for 3 years. "You don't have to do this," Keanu said, his voice steady despite the weapon aimed at his chest. His dark hair caught what little light filtered through the dirty windows, framing a face that seemed both familiar and foreign. Eliza's finger trembled against the trigger. "You know I do." The weight of the small revolver threatened to pull her arm down, but she held firm. 3 years of planning, of waiting, of suffering, all for this moment. Behind Keanu, the old wooden chair where her sister had died remained untouched, as if preserved in time. Dark stains still marked the floorboards beneath it. Eliza's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. She couldn't afford weakness. Not now. "I've changed," Keanu whispered, his hands slightly raised at his sides. "I'm not the same man I was." "Neither am I," Eliza replied, her voice breaking. "That's your fault too." A metallic clang echoed through the warehouse as the side door burst open. Officer Jake Thompson stepped inside, gun drawn, water dripping from his uniform. His dark eyes darted between Eliza and Keanu, assessing the situation in seconds. "Eliza, put the gun down," he commanded, though his tone held a hint of desperation beneath the authority. "Stay out of this, Jake," she warned, never taking her eyes off Keanu. "You don't know what he did." "I know exactly what he did," Jake replied, stepping forward cautiously, "but this isn't the way." Thunder crashed overhead, and in that moment of elemental fury, Eliza pulled the trigger. The sound was almost swallowed by the storm, but its echo reverberated through the cavernous space, marking the exact second everything changed. 3 years earlier, Eliza Bennett had been someone else entirely. A 32-year-old museum curator specializing in contemporary art, she spent her days surrounded by beauty. Her small office at the Whitney had become a sanctuary, walls covered with postcards from exhibitions around the world, shelves filled with art books, and always a fresh bouquet of whatever flowers the corner bodega had on sale that week. Her sister Sarah would tease her about it. "You're living in a Wes Anderson film," she'd say, perched on the edge of Eliza's desk, stealing jelly beans from the crystal dish their grandmother had left them. "Some of us appreciate aesthetics," Eliza would reply, smiling. Sarah, 5 years younger and infinitely more pragmatic, worked as an investigative journalist, chasing stories across the city with relentless determination. They were different in almost every way. Eliza, with her careful planning and quiet introspection. Sarah, with her impulsivity and boisterous laugh. But their bond had only strengthened after their parents' death in a car accident when Sarah was still in college. "We've got new acquisition proposals today," Eliza told her assistant Devon as she arrived at work that particular Tuesday morning. "The Reeves Foundation is considering a major donation." Devon whistled. "Keanu Reeves, the actor who suddenly became an art collector?" "The very same," Eliza replied, settling at her desk. "His foundation has been donating collections to museums across the country." The meeting with Keanu Reeves later that week had gone remarkably well. He was tall and distinguished, with dark hair and the kind of quiet confidence that seemed to fill the room. His knowledge of the collection surprised Eliza. He spoke about each piece with genuine passion, explaining the story behind each work. "Art connects us to our humanity," he explained, his voice soft but resonant. "These pieces deserve to be shared with the public." Over the next several months, Eliza worked closely with Keanu to catalog and prepare the collection for exhibition. He was thoughtful, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in her expertise. When he invited her to dinner to discuss the exhibition opening, she accepted without hesitation. Sarah had been suspicious from the start. "There's something off about him," she'd said, sprawled across Eliza's couch one evening, His foundation has some questionable financial trails. Eliza had laughed it off. Not everyone with money is corrupt, Sarah. Your journalist paranoia is showing. Sarah had thrown a pillow at her. It's not paranoia if they're actually out to get you. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Eliza had replied, not knowing those would be among the last words they'd exchange. 2 weeks later, Sarah disappeared. Her apartment was found in disarray, signs of a struggle evident. The police investigation stalled quickly. No witnesses, no clear motive. Officer Jake Thompson had been assigned to the case, and from their first meeting, Eliza sensed his determination. He had a stern demeanor that masked his kindness, and he promised to find Sarah. I won't stop looking, he'd told Eliza, handing her his card. Call me any time, day or night. Weeks passed. The exhibition of the Reeves collection opened to acclaim. Keanu remained attentive, offering comfort and distraction during Eliza's darkest moments. 6 weeks after Sarah's disappearance, her body was found in an abandoned warehouse near the waterfront. She had been tortured before being killed. The funeral was a blur. Eliza moved through it like a ghost, accepting condolences from colleagues, from friends, from Keanu Reeves, who stood by her side throughout the service, a silent pillar of support. It was 3 days later, while sorting through Sarah's belongings, that Eliza found her sister's hidden research files. Newspaper clippings, financial documents, photographs, all pointing to Keanu Reeves's involvement in a complex money laundering scheme. And there, tucked between pages of financial records, was a photograph of the warehouse where Sarah's body had been found, a property owned by one of Reeves's shell companies. The realization had hit Eliza with physical force, driving her to her knees amidst the scattered papers. The man who had held her hand at her sister's funeral was the one who had ordered her death. The monster had been beside her all along. She had called Officer Thompson immediately. He arrived within the hour, his face grim as he reviewed Sarah's findings. This is circumstantial, he'd said finally. We need more to connect him directly to her murder. But it's him, Eliza had insisted. It has to be. Jake had taken her, hands in his touch steady and warm. I believe you. But if we move too quickly, he'll walk free. We need to be smart about this. That night, alone in her apartment, Eliza made a decision. If justice couldn't be found through legal channels, she would find it another way. She began planning methodically and carefully, just as she planned her exhibitions, just as she curated art. Only this time, she was curating vengeance. Rain continued to pound the warehouse roof as Eliza watched Keanu clutch his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. She'd aimed for his heart but flinched at the last moment. The weapon felt foreign in her hands. She'd only practiced at the range a dozen times, always imagining Keanu's face on the target. Eliza, drop the gun, Jake shouted, moving closer, his own weapon still drawn. He killed her, Eliza said, voice hollow. He had her tortured in this very spot because she discovered what he was doing. He sat next to me at her funeral, Jake. He held my hand while I cried. I know, Jake replied, his voice softening. That's why we're here. We have him now, Eliza. The evidence came through. Keanu's eyes widened as he looked between them. What evidence? Jake kept his gun trained on Keanu, but spoke to Eliza. The offshore accounts Sarah was tracking, we got access. And his former security chief, Michael Carter, agreed to testify about the orders Reeves gave regarding your sister. You're lying, Keanu spat, pressing harder against his wound. Carter would never turn on me. People change, Jake replied, echoing Keanu's earlier words, especially when facing life in prison themselves. It's over, Reeves. Eliza's arm lowered slightly, the gun suddenly unbearably heavy. Why didn't you tell me? I was coming to tell you tonight, Jake explained. When I found your note, I knew where you'd go. He took another step forward. I've been working this case for 3 years, Eliza. I never stopped. I promised you I wouldn't. Through the broken windows, blue and red lights began to flash, illuminating the rain in strobing colors. The sound of police radios crackled in the distance. You have a choice, Jake said gently. Let him face justice for what he did. Real justice. Eliza looked at Keanu, truly looked at him. The powerful man who had murdered her sister now seemed smaller, diminished by his exposed crimes. The gun in her hand represented a simple solution, an end to the pain, an answer to the rage that had fueled her for years. But it would also be an end to herself, to whatever remained of the woman she had been before. Her finger eased off the trigger. "Sarah would want you to live," Jake said softly. "She fought for truth, not vengeance." The words struck her like physical blows. Sarah, who had risked everything to expose corruption. Sarah, with her unflagging belief in justice. What would she think of what Eliza had become? The side door burst open again as police officers poured in, weapons raised. Time seemed to slow as Eliza made her decision. With deliberate movements, she placed the gun on the floor and stepped away from it, raising her hands. Keanu lunged suddenly, reaching for her discarded weapon. Jake reacted instantly, tackling him to the ground. Other officers rushed forward, securing Keanu as he shouted threats and denials that echoed hollowly through the warehouse. As they led Keanu away, he locked eyes with Eliza one final time. "You should have pulled the trigger," he snarled. "You'll never really be free of this." Jake gently placed his jacket around Eliza's shoulders as paramedics entered the building. "He's wrong," he said. "This is how you begin to be free." The trial lasted 6 weeks. Eliza testified about Sarah's investigation, about the evidence her sister had gathered at the cost of her life. Keanu's former security chief, Michael Carter, detailed the orders given regarding Sarah Bennett: follow her, frighten her, and finally, silence her permanently. Financial experts traced the money through layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. Throughout it all, Jake sat in the courtroom, a steady presence behind Eliza. He'd been removed from the case officially after the warehouse incident. His involvement with Eliza deemed a conflict of interest, but he attended every day of the proceedings. When the guilty verdict was read, Eliza felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a hollow sense of completion. Keanu Reeves would spend the rest of his life in prison. Sarah's killers had been identified and convicted as well. The system had eventually worked. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Eliza walked past them, her eyes fixed on the steps ahead. Jake followed silently, keeping the press at bay with stern glances. They reached the bottom of the steps before Eliza finally spoke. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted, turning to face him. "For 3 years I've been defined by her death, by hunting him. I'm not sure what's left." Jake studied her face, his expression thoughtful. "You're whoever you choose to be now," he said. "That's the thing about endings. They're also beginnings if you let them be." Eliza glanced back at the courthouse where Keanu was being led to a transport vehicle in handcuffs. "Do you think she would be proud of how it ended?" "I think," Jake said carefully, "she would be proud that you found justice without losing yourself in the process. That's the harder path." Eliza nodded, feeling tears threaten for the first time in months. Not the hot tears of rage she'd grown accustomed to, but something cleaner, something that felt like release. "I kept her jelly beans," she said suddenly. "The dish on my desk. I haven't touched them since she disappeared. That seems so strange now." "Not strange," Jake replied. "Human." He hesitated, then added, "I have the rest of the day off. Would you like to get coffee? We've never actually talked about anything besides the case." The unexpected normalcy of the question startled a small laugh from Eliza. "I don't even know how to have a normal conversation anymore." "We can figure it out together," he offered, "one word at a time." As they walked away from the courthouse, Eliza felt something shift inside her. Not healing, not yet, but the possibility of it. Sarah would always be a missing piece, a presence defined by absence. But maybe, Eliza thought, she could learn to carry that absence differently. "Tell me about your sister," Jake said as they reached the corner. "Not about how she died. Tell me about how she lived." Eliza took a deep breath, feeling the weight of silence lifting as she began to speak. "She used to steal jelly beans from my desk," she started. "Always the red ones first." The words came easier than expected, memories flowing like water breaking through a dam. With each step forward, the warehouse and its ghosts receded further into the past, not forgotten but no longer defining the path ahead.